Welcome back to The Progenitor. This is the podcast where we go over a director's entire filmography, talking about themes, scenes, pacing, and give a brief review, all within 30 minutes. So let's get started. Next up, we dive into Kidnapping, especially in Rome, Italy. And this particular story is based on a true story. If you guys don't know, next up, we are talking about all the money in the world. Now, just to give you a little brief plot description, I kind of already mentioned it, but pretty much this film is about the kidnapping of John Paul Getty's grandson, John Paul Getty III, and all the efforts that go into finding him, especially by his mother, Gail, Fletcher Chase, and money negotiations with John Paul Getty, who is surprisingly miserly and cheap, especially in the way it makes sense. Come on, man. You're the richest person in the world. Everyone's trying to take advantage of you. So if someone gets kidnapped, you might as well game the system, right? Pay the ransom up to the certain amount where it's tax-free deductible, maybe? That's kind of cold, especially if it is your favorite grandson. But a lot of stuff goes on in this film, and let's just get down to a really quick review. I do like this movie, okay? I do like it. It is mired in some production problems. Primarily, if we get into this right now, Kevin Spacey was originally cast as John Paul Getty. And unfortunately, a lot of information came out about, the whole Me Too movement came out, and a lot of people came out accusing Kevin Spacey of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, and a lot of these different allegations that came out. And because of this, Ridley Scott decided to edit out any scene that Kevin Spacey was in and replace him with Christopher Plummer. So they had a couple of weeks of reshoots, and at the same time, Ridley Scott did it and was able to get the final cut out on the day that it was supposed to be released. Anyways, so we're talking about Ridley Scott, professional, moving quick. He knows everyone on his team. And on top of that, there's also additional production problems, not problems, but like production issues, especially during the reshoots. Michelle Williams, who plays Gail, she was being paid minimally, whereas Mark Wahlberg got like 1.5 million, and he got lambasted, and he decided to give that money to a charity. So that's a good thing. Now, back to the review of the film. I think it's a pretty good thriller. Now, my only problem with it is that not every character is fleshed out. I mean, you have what? This film is, I believe it's around 2 hours and 12 minutes. I think if you added probably like 20 more minutes and give Fletcher Chase just a little more meat, it'd be a lot more well-rounded of a film. Now, there's a great cast we're talking about here. Christopher Plummer is amazing. You got Michelle Williams. She's killing it. And then there's this French actor named Romain Duris, or Roman Duris. I really don't know how to say his name, but he plays Cinquanta. And he's actually one of the kidnappers that befriends John Paul Getty III, played by Charlie Plummer, who's of no relation to Christopher Plummer. And Charlie Plummer does a very great job of this. And, you have all these secondary, ancillary characters that are just killing it. And then you have Mark Wahlberg, who I feel like doesn't know what he's doing in this role, number one. Number two, the character is not fleshed out. He's supposed to be like a cool negotiator. He's supposed to be cool under fire. He's supposed to be smart, suave. And Mark Wahlberg, no offense, does not hit those particular qualities. For me, if I were to have cast it, I would have cast Russell Crowe. I think Russell Crowe would have made a great Fletcher Chase, strong presence, and it's not all about the muscle, it's the aura, the presence that Russell Crowe has. And unfortunately, Mark Wahlberg doesn't have that feel, and the character kind of just gets away from him. On top of that, like I said before, this character is the most underwritten character out of all of them. And of course, you have the most interesting character being John Paul Getty, and then everything else that's happening beneath him, right? And it's really interesting because John Paul Getty is supposed to be a side character, a supporting character, but throughout the entire film, you feel his presence. It's kind of like the third man with Orson Welles. It's just really crazy that he looms so much in the foreground. But like at the same time, you have Michelle Williams giving a stellar performance. I don't I don't think she was nominated for an Academy Award, but she definitely should have got it for this movie because Gail is such a powerful female character. She's so strong and she'll do anything to get her son back, pretty much. So let's dive into it, right? Let's dive into the cast, the crew, of which I've already mentioned a few people already. So of course, Ridley Scott directed, produced. I didn't write any notes, so we're just going off of what's going on Letterboxd because I love this app. And there's a bunch of producers, but I think the two that we should lock onto is Mark Huffam. Mark Huffam worked on The Martian, Prometheus, Alien, Covenant, so they kind of have this working relationship. And secondarily, Kevin J. Walsh, who worked on All the Money in the World, and he's actually working with Ridley Scott on future projects like The Last Duel, House of Gucci, and the new Napoleon film. So I wanted to bring those particular producers up. Now, the script was written by David Scarpa. Now, let me read a couple of these movies. The remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still with Keanu Reeves, and then The Last Castle with Robert Redford. Now, none of these movies are anything like All the Money in the World. Number one, Day the Earth Stood Still, that's a sci-fi thriller, and it didn't do well at the box office. And then The Last Castle. Now, I think that one's about, okay, so a court-martial general rallies together 1,200 inmates to rise against the system that put him away. It got pretty good reviews, middling, if anything, around the 50s in Rotten Tomatoes. But, already his writing creds are minimal. So for him to come out with All the Money in the World is very interesting. And on top of that, Ridley Scott's going to work with him again. Now, let's move forward, and we can get into that a little later. Claire Simpson is the editor. If you guys recall, Claire Simpson did a couple of earlier ones like Someone to Watch Over Me. She is going to work on other Ridley Scott projects in the future, including House of Gucci and The Last Duel, which, we'll talk about those for sure. And then next up, Darius Wolski. We already know he's already probably worked on more than 4 or 5. So let me take a look at this. You got Exodus, and then you have The Martian, Prometheus, Alien Covenant. So this is probably the 5th one, or 6th one, because he did The Counselor as well. So one of the things I feel is Darius Wolski probably works very fast, and Ridley Scott just really likes the graininess and the HD feel and the filters that Darius Wolski uses, because it's very gray, it's very grim a lot of times. And a lot of stories Ridley Scott shoots are kind of very noirish if you think about it. If they're not sci-fi, they're very noirish. Like The Counselor was very noirish. So he's looking for the shadows, and he's trying to get that very cold feel. Recently, a lot of the Ridley Scott films have been feeling very, very cold, and that's because of Darius Wolski's shooting capability. Now, next up, you have Arthur Max. And guys, Arthur Max has been working with Ridley Scott for a bunch of films, 9 or 10. Additionally, the musical composer was Daniel Pemberton, The Counselor. So I think I mentioned in The Counselor, that one had that really Western twang to it, had a little guitar riff. This one is more large scale, operatic, a lot of cellos, and just kind of more of an elegant, classical feel to it. And you want to have that because the story is about a larger than life true character who's his own emperor, right? John Paul Getty was the richest man in the world at the time. He created, or he didn't create, but like, well, maybe, yeah. I mean, it was his house, the Getty Villa. So, and he was just this larger than life character. So when you get down to it, you want to have that coldness, number one, from Darius Wolski. Number two, you want to have this epic, elegant string orchestral music. And you definitely get that from Daniel Pemberton. Let's get down to the cast. Michelle Williams, Christopher Plummer, Mark Wahlberg, Roman Duris, Timothy Hutton. Wow, that's a name you don't hear often, but he's still such a great character actor. Charlie Plummer, and a lot of Italian actors on the side. You just have a lot of great character actors. I think, as I mentioned before, Mark Wahlberg is the weak link, and I think it's not just the presence and it's not just the underwritten character. It's just he feels like he didn't want to be there. Like he is really diving into the gray and the dullness. He has this dullness to him. And it reminds me a little bit of his previous performance with M. Night Shyamalan, The Happening. Yeah. Oh my God, The Happening. But let's talk about some themes and power of female characters. Gail is a strong lady. She takes it all the way. Now, if they had cast Russell Crowe, I think it would have been like another Proof of Life, because Proof of Life was kind of like this in the sense. But in Proof of Life, the Fletcher Chase character actually goes into action and actually falls in love with like the Gale character in Proof of Life. But in this movie, they barely have a relationship. And I think that's also what's missing. I wish there was something that made them a little more compatible, not as lovers, but at least as friends. Because if you're stuck in this high stress situation and you want to have a developed relationship in a sense, like someone who's sympathetic towards your needs. And I don't feel like that was there essentially, but we're talking about empowered female characters, and Gail is the strongest of them. She could have taken John Paul Getty's money in terms of when she divorced with John Paul Getty II, but she didn't take alimony or anything. She didn't want any of that. She basically just wanted the kids. So, and throughout the movie, whatever happens, she's always at the forefront of trying to find her son. So, nature's space is a hostile and uncontrollable environment. I think it's a little different because John Paul Getty III kind of understands Rome, but at the same time, he gets kidnapped in it because he thinks he owns the night. He thinks so he gets cocky pretty much. And because of that cockiness, he gets abducted. So, hey, it could happen to anyone, anywhere, anytime. So there you go. That is why it's hostile and uncontrollable. Next up, the only way to survive is to adapt. Now, yeah, this is the case. John Paul Getty befriends Cinquanta, and they're able to sort of have a camaraderie. And he, John Paul Getty III, he doesn't act like a spoiled brat. He realizes he's in trouble, so he's trying to find a way that he doesn't get killed. And the best way to do it is to try to befriend the guy who kidnapped you. And Cinquanta is a very sympathetic person because he ends up having a softer heart for John Paul Getty and tries to stay with John Paul Getty III the whole way through. Even when John Paul Getty III is purchased, kind of like on the black market by the Italian mafia. So he's Cinquanta is like, let me handle this kid. I've been handling him for the past, what, 3 months? I don't know how long they were kidnapped. But so because John Paul Getty III is able to play a certain kind of role to make Cinquanta sympathize for him, he's able to survive basically. Because things could have gone a lot worse. Age does not mean a thing. Ding, ding, ding. Number one, John Paul Getty is the oldest dude in the movie, and he's still a cold-hearted dude, right? You have John Paul Getty III just trying to survive, and guess what he does? Because he's able to befriend Cinquanta, and then you got Gail just killing it, you know? And she's probably younger than Fletcher Chase. Fletcher Chase is just kind of like floating around like a bee. He doesn't know what he's doing, and everyone is see, he's supposed to be like a professional, and everyone seems to be one step ahead of him. He almost gets John Paul Getty III killed as well. Next up, do not trust rich people. I'm gonna tie that in with money is coveted. Ding ding ding. Yeah, basically, John Paul Getty does not want to pay the ransom because he's like, if I pay now, then a whole bunch of other people are going to try to kidnap my other grandchildren, and then what's going to happen to all my money? So to him, it's all about the money and the power that represents. And so at the end of the film, he's like, all right, I'll pay the ransom, but he will only pay it to the tax deductible amount. And so what happens, Gail and Fletcher come up with this plan to basically make John Paul Getty look like a complete dick. And John Paul Getty relents and is like, all right, fine, I'll just pay it. I don't care how much taxes I have to pay on it. So, yeah, so don't trust rich people. Violence don't solve a thing, brains do. Okay, so in this case, Fletcher Chase is not about the violence. He's about the negotiations. And I wish they had someone better in terms of wordsmith. You know, someone, a, pretty much a better actor. No offense. I mean, you could have got Leo. Leo could have played this like he did Body of Lies. It would have been just as good of a character. And on top of that, Leo is a true character actor. So he could bring other emotional whatever's not on the script, he could bring it out. You know what I mean? I feel like Mark Wahlberg can sometimes be very surface. Anyways, let's move on. Happy wife, happy life. Well, if John Paul Getty II had stayed with Gail, maybe he would have been happier. I don't know. But Gail is definitely happier alone. And maybe John Paul Getty III would never have gotten kidnapped if John Paul Getty II kept his job and stayed out of the family business. So there you go. Ding, ding, ding. Distrust of authority. That kind of goes with the whole John Paul Getty. So Battle of the Sexes. This whole film is basically Gail versus John Paul Getty. Gail versus Fletcher Chase. Gail versus Cinquanta. Gail versus blah, blah, blah. So Gail is just like, I got to get my kid back. One track mind. She just will do anything to save her son. Next up, do not trust robots, androids. Not in this movie. The afterlife, death, God. I mean, when you get kidnapped, you're really thinking about these kind of things, right? Especially at the part where John Paul Getty III gets his ear cut off, and then his mom is like freaking out. Is my son dead? And then there's this part of the film where basically the original kidnappers accidentally reveals his identity to John Paul Getty III and is about to shoot him, but another one of the kidnappers sees and then shoots that kidnapper and then burns his body and leaves it on the side of like the road. So basically, everyone thinks that's John Paul Getty III when it's actually a different kidnapper. And so for a moment, Gail's like really, really scared that she lost her son. But, anyways, let us get to some of the scenes that I really enjoyed. Honestly, any scene with Christopher Plummer talking to his grandson, John Paul Getty III, as a kid, those are all excellent scenes. Christopher Plummer has like this really great presence. Number one, he's very warm. You look at his face, he feels like a grandpa. You really want to give him a hug. But then all of a sudden, he starts talking. And then you're just like, wow, this guy's a real dick. All he thinks about is money. So whenever he's talking to his grandson, there's a bit of that warmth that comes out. But little do you know that there's something beneath that warmth, because there's that coldness of John Paul Getty not really knowing who he can trust and who he can truly love. So any scene with Christopher Plummer is just amazing. And on top of that, any scene with Michelle Williams really kicks it up a notch. One of the best scenes is like she goes to see she goes to see John Paul Getty, and John Paul Getty just won't see her. So she's just trying to call on this payphone that is in John Paul Getty's house that he forces people to use when they could just use like a normal phone. And you have to pay for it. Like you have to use the actual coin. And I just remember just seeing these scenes of her annoyance. Like, how could I have been a part of this family? It's just hilarious and it's just great. And even when the Italian police find the charred body of the kidnapper, who they all think is John Paul Getty III, what happens is she has to go to ID the body. She goes in and she opens she pulls open the tarp and she's like, dude, this guy is an old man. This is not my son. So she gives such a stellar performance. And then on top of that, any scene with Cinquanta and John Paul Getty III, because Roman Duras is just like this very charismatic actor. And he's able to bring out this sympathy. Like, you can tell that this guy doesn't really want to be here, but he needs money to support his family. So him and a bunch of other idiots decide to kidnap the world's richest man's grandson to get some cash. It gets way out of his hands. And then he sells this kid to the Italian mafia. He says he wants to stay on, and then all of a sudden they're cutting his ear. Yeah, they're cutting John Paul Getty's ear off, and he's like, "Oh my god, what have I done?" And so he's so good. You just see like the stress on his face. It's such a great performance. I wish he got nominated for like a supporting actor. But overall, like this whole cast is just amazing. The dialogue is well done, except for Fletcher Chase. So I really wish David Scarpa really put a little more effort on that character. I really wish they recast Mark Wahlberg because, no offense, but he's like lacking depth. He lacks so much in this performance. And you could tell he wanted to do The Departed. He wanted this to be like an Oscar film for him. It just didn't work out because he doesn't have that depth. Like, if you watch The Departed, what what is great about that character? What's great about it is Mark Wahlberg kind of lived that life. Number one. Number two, that character is just angry the whole time. There's no real depth to that character. So it's a very surface level emotional performance, because it's not easy to be angry when you're acting. So he has to be able to do that, but it's a very one note character. So when you're trying to do a 3-dimensional, but only being able to do one dimension, there's the lacking. No offense. But yeah, other than that, really good film. Okay. It's not in the top 10, of course. Maybe in the top 20. We're still doing the rankings. But overall, it's a very entertaining film. I definitely recommend it. Now, next up, Ridley Scott takes us back to the Middle Ages. Is it the Middle Ages? Knights in shining armor ages. And it is a stunner. It's got one of the greatest action scenes I remember. And we will be talking about The Last Duel in our next episode. So join us. Oh, that's right. Where can you see The Last Duel? Let me double check, because I normally buy these movies, but guess what? It's on Hulu. And surprisingly, because it is 20th Century Studios, it used to be 20th Century Fox. So essentially, this was also originally on Disney Plus, but I think Hulu is like a subsidiary, so they probably just transferred it to Hulu. So it is streaming, thank God. And the film after that, House of Gucci, since we're already on the last three, so I'm just going to say that one was actually originally streaming on Amazon. It looks like it's off though. So I bought it. And the one thing I will say is I'm kind of missing the Ridley Scott commentaries, because on these last three movies, All the Money in the World, The Last Duel, and House of Gucci, he has not done audio commentaries. And I'm starting to miss them, because it's really nice hearing where his mindset came from when it came to like the decisions he made making the film. But hey, it's all good. Last Duel, Hulu, check it out. I love it. We'll talk about it next time. And then the final film, House of Gucci, because his most recent film in production is Napoleon, and it's coming out 2023. So we'll see when we can do that. But for now, this is it, guys. The final two films. So join me as we finish up Ridley Scott. All right, thanks. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.